Welcome to the Market Decoder, your go-to podcast for digestible market insights. Join us as we deep dive into the latest trends, uncover valuable insights, and share expert perspectives you won't find anywhere else.
Okay, buckle up, everybody. Today, we're going to dive into a topic that's making waves. It's the Panama Canal. We want to get up to speed on some recent news, specifically BlackRock's purchase of the ports at both ends of this iconic waterway and how that ties into the canal's history and future. There's a lot to unpack.
What's fascinating here, I think, is that it's not just a simple business deal. There's so much history, engineering, even geopolitics wrapped up in this story.
Okay, let's dive in.
First, can you give us a quick rundown on this breaking news about BlackRock? Do they own the canal now?
So, BlackRock has just bought a majority stake in CK Hutchison Holdings. This deal involves the transfer of operational control of 43 ports worldwide, and 2 of them are the ports in Panama. This doesn't mean they own the canal. They now control the ports at both the Atlantic and Pacific entrances to the Panama Canal.
And remind me, Hutchison Ports is...
A Hong Kong-based company.
Okay. So this deal shifts control of this key infrastructure from a company with ties to China to an American one. And that timing is interesting. This comes right after some tension between the U.S. and Panama over the canal itself.
Yeah, exactly. There's been loud rhetoric from the U.S. on reclaiming the canal, while Panama issued a strong denial emphasizing that the canal was part of their inseparable territory. Just a few weeks later, we have this deal.
Wow. So what do you make of all that? What are the implications here?
Well, it raises some questions about global trade patterns and U.S. China relations for sure. The Panama Canal handles about 5% of global maritime trade and a whopping 40% of U.S. container traffic. So that's a huge chunk of goods flowing through that relatively small strip of land.
Okay, we've got this major financial deal with potential geopolitic ripples. But to really understand all of this, we need some historical context, right?
Absolutely. The history of the Panama Canal is captivating to say the least. It's got details going all the way back to the 1500s.
Think about that for a second. Back then, the idea of connecting the Atlantic and Pacific was mind-boggling.
The first transition route was actually established to carry plundered treasures from Peru to Spain, but that didn't go so well, as the Europeans couldn't overcome the inhospitable conditions.
So how did the US get involved?
Well, the US saw an opportunity to purchase their assets and rights. In addition, the US also supported Panama's separation from Colombia in 1903 to get control of the land they needed for the canal.
So the US essentially orchestrated a revolution to get what they want.
Yeah, it was a complex historical event with lasting repercussions. But the outcome was that the US gained control of the canal and the surrounding Panama Canal zone for decades.
And they embarked on this massive construction effort, a true feat of engineering.
Yeah, it was an enormous undertaking. They excavated millions of cubic yards of earth and rock to create this artificial waterway.
So the canal hinges on this, artificial waterway, which I assume also depends on rainfall.
Yeah.
That sounds potentially problematic.
You're right. Water scarcity and drought conditions are a growing concern for the Panama Canal's future. And on top of that, ship sizes were increasing due to the demands of global trade. And those ships were pushing the limits of the original canal. So a massive expansion project was completed in 2016. And on the topic of water scarcity, just recently in 2024, there was a severe drought that stopped a lot of traffic in the canal. So that raised alarm bells about the long-term sustainability of the canal, which brings us back to that BlackRock deal.
Right.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's clear that the control of the Panama Canal and its surrounding infrastructure is a highly strategic issue.
Okay, so we've got this complex web of historical and engineering and geopolitics and even some environmental concerns swirling around the Panama Canal. Let's try to connect some of these knots. No, we want to know what are the potential impact of this BlackRock deal, right?
Yeah, and to understand that impact, we need to consider a few key things. First, the canal's importance in global trade can't be overstated. It's a linchpin in the supply chain that moves goods around the world. Any disruption to the canal, whether due to political tensions, environmental issues, or even just increased traffic, has ripple effects throughout the global economy.
So BlackRock's control of those key ports gives them some leverage in this system.
They have a seat at the table, so to speak, when it comes to decisions about how the canal operates and who benefits from it.
And that brings us to the second point: U.S. China relations. These two economic superpowers are vying for influence around the world, and control of critical infrastructure, like the Panama Canal, is a piece of that puzzle. It almost feels like a 21st century version of the Great Game where these global powers are maneuvering for strategic advantage.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
But it's not just about a global power play, right? We also have to consider the impact on Panama itself.
Oh, absolutely. Panama has a unique relationship with the canal. It's a source of national pride and a major driver of their economy, but it also makes them vulnerable to external pressures.
Especially with those environmental concerns we talked about.
Yeah, water scarcity is a major threat to the canal's long term viability. If there's not enough water to operate those massive locks, the whole system grinds to a halt. And climate change is exacerbating the problem with more frequent and intense droughts.
So Panama is caught between these global forces and environmental challenges. How do you see this playing out?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but a few scenarios are possible. One possibility is that BlackRock, with its financial and political connections, could help Panama address some of the water management issues. They might invest in, new infrastructure or technology to improve water conservation efficiency.
That sounds like a positive outcome, but I imagine there could be downsides as well.
Of course, so some people are concerned that the company might push for increased traffic through the canal, even if it puts a strain on the water resources.
So there's a delicate balance to strike between economic growth and long term sustainability.
Exactly. And then there's also the wild card of US China relations.
It's almost like Panama standing at the crossroads, facing all these different pressures. What advice would you give them?
Well, I think the key is to maintain their sovereignty and make strategic decisions that benefit Panama in the long run. They need to carefully consider the environmental impacts of any new developments and make sure to have a voice in how the canal is managed. They should also diversify their economy and not rely solely on the canal for the economic well being.
Sounds like Panama has a lot to think about.
They do.
And speaking of thinking things through, let's bring it all home. What are your key takeaways about this deep dive?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is how interconnected everything is. Remember, we started with a seemingly simple news story about a port purchase, and then it led us to this web of history, engineering, global trade, and even international relations.
It's like pulling a single thread and realizing it's connected to an entire tapestry.
Exactly, and that interconnectedness is something to keep in mind as we think about the future of the Panama Canal. The decisions made by companies like BlackRock, governments like Panama and the US, and even individual consumers all have a ripple effect.
What are some specific things we should watch for in the coming months or years?
Well, first, keep an eye on how BlackRock manages these ports. Also, pay attention to the US China relations and how those dynamics might play out in Panama. And finally, watch for any new developments and potential alternative shipping routes.
So, lots to keep an eye on this seemingly simple news story. We've gone beyond the headlines and gained a deeper understanding of a complex issue. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we have.
Keep learning and keep diving deep into the world around you. Until next time.
The content provided is for informational and educational purposes only. The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests are their own and do not reflect the views of any affiliated organizations or institutions. Investing involves risks, including the potential loss of principal. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Listeners are encouraged to conduct their own research, consult with qualified financial advisors before making any financial decisions. The information shared is based on current market trends and data available at the time of recording and may change over time.